Hello, Jonathan, Alexander said. Are you wondering where your wife is? She's right here with me. He pointed the camera at Nancy, and she heard Jonathan's gasp through the phone. He knew that something had happened to his wife because Esther had called him as soon as Nancy had failed to come out of the fitting room. He had excused himself from his business meeting and had been waiting anxiously on the phone. He thought desperately about what he should do. He was in Seattle and she was in New York, so it would take him far too long to try to rescue her himself. Norman had gone back to Cuba to tie up a few loose ends for him, so he instructed Jack to find someone who could help. I bet you thought this day would never come, didn't you? Alexander said through the phone. His eyes looked crazed. You forced me to do this. If you hadn't got rid of my people and interfered with my plans, I wouldn't have risked my life to come to the U.S. He laughed loudly. I finally succeeded. And as a bonus, I even managed to capture your wife. Jonathan listened to his crazy rantings and didn't try to interrupt. I know your men will catch me sooner or later, Alexander continued. He still had the camera pointed toward Nancy, but he directed his words at Jonathan's face on his phone screen. But don't worry, before I die, I'll make sure I give her a good time, and then she can die with me. Just think about how exciting it'll be to see that with your own eyes. He laughed again, and it was all Jonathan could do to remain calm and not let Alexander get to him. Alexander had grown up with a silver spoon in his mouth, and he had never had to overcome any challenges in his life. But 3 years earlier, after Jonathan had led the Davis Group to such success, he had discovered that Matthew had his eye on Jonathan and was thinking about making him the successor of the family business. That was when his troubles began. He would never forget the day that Jonathan had arrived in Cuba, all full of smiles. He eagerly told Matthew that he had just signed off on a difficult deal. But what Jonathan didn't know was that Alexander was listening through the door of his father's study. He had heard something that he would never forget in his life. Well, Walter, I never expected that, Matthew said to his butler after Jonathan had left his study. My brother was a pretty sharp businessman, but I didn't think his son would have such an astute business acumen. Indeed. But what about Alexander? Walter asked. He's here with us. What does it matter where he is? I have 4 sons, and to me, they're all the same. That's true. Jonathan seems to be more promising than all of them. I see that now. From now on, I want you to help me keep an eye on him. Report to me everything that he does. Yes, sir. Walter nodded. So, what you mean is... I'm old now, Walter. Matthew interrupted him. It's time to consider who will be my successor. Alexander's not a bad option, but I sometimes think he's too extreme. I'd like to observe him and Jonathan carefully. Don't talk about your old age, sir. Your body's still fit and healthy. Walter poured Matthew some coffee. What do you think of this coffee? Frederick bought it back from a business trip. I used Boyle spring water with it. Have a taste. And with that, the conversation in Matthew's study changed. Alexander, who still stood outside the door, peeking in, stared motionless at the door handle as if he expected it to hold all of the answers. A cold, steely look spread across his face, and he felt as if someone had poured a bucket of ice water over him that penetrated his bones. Alexander had always had to compete against his older brothers to get Matthew's attention. But after hearing what he had just heard, he felt that his father had always taken him for a fool. He had served Matthew and done his bidding for more than 20 years, but Matthew had always been the one to benefit. Alexander had never received any rewards for the work he had done. He had made one mistake, and the thing that he had worked for his whole life would be handed to his cousin, who had never been part of the Davidson family. After that day, he began to watch Jonathan like a hawk. He spent more than 6 months investigating everything that had even the slightest thing to do with him. The more he discovered about his cousin, the more uncertain he became about his own future. The man was too perfect. He didn't seem to have an emotional weakness at all, and Alexander began to wonder if the only way he could make his move was through Jonathan's own family and friends. So, 2 years earlier, he had started to build his plan. He didn't know exactly what he would need to put it into effect, but he knew that once he used it, it would be the final straw for Jonathan. But he hadn't expected to misjudge the man and still be standing on the back foot after having set up so many schemes. Jonathan had everything: love, friendships, and even a good familial relationship with Steve. He was the one in the spotlight being worshipped by all the people around him. Alexander, on the other hand, was hated by everyone. When the plane incident was exposed, he was arrested and imprisoned. He felt like an animal that had been captured and forced to live far from its natural environment. Only he knew the hatred and pain that it had caused him. His power and influence saved him, and he was waiting for the right time to turn the situation around. But Jonathan's people seemed to be everywhere. His own forces in Cuba were gradually depleted, and the situation became hopeless. He wondered if he could find an opportunity to disappear. Maybe he could hide his identity and live a carefree life far away under an assumed identity. But he was a proud man, used to being at the top of the food chain. He found it difficult to swallow his fate and accept the shadow of the man that he had become. After all, not everyone had the courage to pick themselves up after a fall. And after 31 years of a privileged life, he had gotten used to being arrogant. His pride refused to let his reputation remain muddied, and he could no longer watch his dignity being trampled by others. So he decided to do something about it. When he arrived in the U.S., Alexander knew that he had to drag Jonathan down, even if he had to die in the process. He waited several days until the opportunity presented itself. It was rare for Nancy and Esther to go shopping together, and even though they both had bodyguards, he knew they wouldn't accompany Nancy when she tried on some clothes. And so, he set his plan in motion. As Nancy sat immobilized on her chair, he savored the expression on Jonathan's face. He looked like he wanted to kill someone, and Alexander laughed with satisfaction. He moved closer to Nancy and angled the phone so that Jonathan could see both of them in the frame. Nancy looked pleadingly into her husband's eyes. Her mouth was still covered with tape, so her eyes were the only way in which she could communicate with him. Jonathan's heart felt as if it would break when he saw the pleading look in her eyes. He could hardly bear to see her like that, but he refused to think that he was too weak to do anything. So he looked at her as reassuringly as he could. He racked his brain frantically for a way to get to her quickly. They were thousands of miles apart, and even if he flew back to New York, there was a real possibility that he wouldn't make it in time. Jack had rallied some of Jonathan's people together, but they were also in a race against time. As his mind raced, he watched in horror as Alexander started to unbutton Nancy's jacket. She struggled against him with all of her strength, but her hands and feet were tied to the chair, and there was nothing she could do. The more she fought, the tighter the rope became, and it bit painfully into her flesh. She tried her best not to cry. If she cried, it would make Alexander feel even more powerful, and she needed to show Jonathan that she was strong enough to withstand whatever was coming her way, for his benefit as much as for her own. She closed her eyes momentarily, and she heard Jonathan's voice imploring her to stay strong. "Maria, don't be afraid. I'll be right there. I'll be with you as soon as I can." And with that, his decision was made. He ran to his car and sped along the Seattle highway toward the airport. His private jet was waiting there, ready to take off at any moment. The image of Nancy tied to a chair was still visible on his phone screen. Alexander's voice came through the car's speaker as Jonathan's car screeched to a halt beside the airplane. "Hey, Jonathan, do you think you'll still want your woman after I've had my way with her?" Jonathan felt sick, as he saw his cousin rip Nancy's jacket off. "You son of a bitch!" he shouted. "If you so much as touch her, I'll kill you and leave your body to be eaten by rabid dogs." Alexander laughed malevolently. "I really don't care." His eyes bulged with hatred. He gritted his teeth and began to unbuckle his belt. "After what I'm about to do, it'll be worth it." Nancy's heart tightened as she thought she might pass out. She felt an icy chill ripple through her body. Jonathan, watching the scene on his phone from the other side of the country, burned with anger and hatred. He wished that he could lay his hands on the monster that was his cousin and rip him to pieces. Alexander pulled a dirty old mattress into view, and then he began to untie the rope around Nancy's ankles. But just then, another voice could be heard in the room. "Alexander, what the hell are you doing?" It was Gavin. He came into view on Jonathan's screen as Alexander was struggling to pull down Nancy's pants. She fought with all her might, and she kicked at him with her newly released limbs. "You're just in time, Gavin," Alexander said. "Come here and help me restrain this woman. She won't keep still. Then, after I've had her, I'll let you enjoy her." "Sounds like a plan," Gavin agreed, and he went to Alexander's assistance. Together, they pulled Nancy down onto the mattress. But then, in a flash, Gavin thrust a knife into Alexander's chest. Alexander's eyes bulged with a look of horror, and he staggered. A moment later, the heart-wrenching pain came, and along with it, a sense of helplessness. He collapsed to the ground. Gavin glanced indifferently at him. "Why, Gavin?" Alexander managed to mutter through his clenched teeth. He was unable to utter any other words, but his thoughts continued in his head. "We're on the same side. We've both been wronged by Jonathan. We could have worked together and make sure he paid for what he's done to us." "You want to know why?" Gavin replied, moving slowly toward Nancy. "Because you touched her, and she's mine. No one is allowed to touch her." Nancy watched the scene before her unfold with wide eyes, but she was careful not to let her guard down. She didn't yet know what Gavin was capable of. He wasn't as bad as Alexander, but he wasn't much better. So, she kept quiet, in order to draw attention away from herself. Alexander's men, who had been guarding the door, rushed their boss's motionless body. "He's dead," Gavin said, kicking him to see if he would move. "Are you going to fight me over a useless dead man?" Alexander's men had always been loyal to him, and one of them crouched down and checked his boss's pulse. Sure enough, he was dead, and the man nodded to his colleagues. He then turned to Gavin. "You're our boss now." Gavin shook his head. "I don't need you." The men looked at each other in surprise, and Gavin waved a dismissive hand at them. "Go on. Go. You're free." Gavin knew that the men might turn on him, but he was prepared to take the risk. He was offering them their freedom, so he believed they wouldn't do anything to him. In the commotion, Alexander's phone had dropped to the ground, and Jonathan's voice could be heard begging to know what was going on. Gavin picked up the phone and looked into the camera. "You owe me a favor." Then, without waiting for a response, he put the phone back down on the table and loosened the rope that still bound Nancy's hands together. As soon as her hands were free, she ripped off the tape that was still stuck to her mouth and gasped with relief. "Thank you." "I meant what I said to Alexander, you know," Gavin said with a sneer, looking her up and down. She gulped, but kept her head. "Thank you," she said again, careful not to say anything that might agitate him. She knew Jonathan's men would be arriving soon, so she had to do whatever she could to keep Gavin calm. "How are you feeling?" He pointed to the wounds on her wrists. I'll get you some ointment for that later. Thanks. Nancy smiled at him, relieved that it appeared he wasn't going to hurt her after all. But she still didn't dare to look at Jonathan on the phone screen, afraid that it might provoke Gavin. Alexander had ripped her coat off, but the rest of her clothes were still intact. She shivered, both with cold and the thought of what had been about to happen to her, and she hugged herself. Gavin took off his coat and handed it to her. On the screen, Jonathan watched everything, his eyes filled with anger and suspicion. Nancy took Gavin's coat gratefully and put it on. It warmed her slightly, but she still shivered. Alexander's men had all gone, leaving the body of their boss on the ground. Nancy and Gavin were the only living souls that remained in the cold room. She looked at the lifeless body and wondered how someone like Alexander, who had once been so illustrious, could have ended up like that. Is this what happens when you have fame and fortune? She thought. You become willing to use any means necessary to get what you want? And then when you've got it, are you ever truly happy? As those thoughts were running through Nancy's head, Jonathan's people arrived. His niece Rose was with them, and when she saw that Nancy was safe and sound, she threw herself into her arms. Are you all right? She asked when she pulled herself away. Nancy nodded, and only then did she dare to look at Jonathan on the screen. She picked up the phone and looked him in the eye. Without warning, the pent-up emotions from the past few hours burst from within her, and her eyes welled up with tears. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Don't worry, Maria, Jonathan said affectionately. Everything's going to be okay. His voice broke as his own emotions got the better of him. I'm so sorry I put you in danger. She shook her head. It's all right. It wasn't your fault. It was that crazy Alexander. Go home and get some rest. Rose will take care of you. Go get some sleep, and by the time you wake up, I'll be there. His voice was soothing and gentle, and for the first time in hours, she began to relax. Sure, she nodded, grateful for his support. Jonathan had arrived at the airport some time ago, and his plane was ready to take off. He used the in-flight Wi-Fi and continued the conversation with Nancy. Don't be afraid, babe, he said reassuringly as he settled into his seat. I'm not afraid anymore. She took a deep breath and tried not to think about what might have happened if Gavin hadn't turned up when he had. Alexander might have kept her imprisoned for the rest of her life. Her fear had been so intense, she had almost passed out. But the beast was dead, and everything was going to be all right. Some of Jonathan's men carried Alexander's body away. Nancy didn't want to know what they were going to do with it. Instead, she got into a car with Rose, and the remaining men took Gavin away. She wondered what would happen to him and guessed he would probably be sent back to Cuba. As she got into the car, she tossed Gavin's coat aside. Whose coat is that? Rose asked. It's Gavin's. Rose chuckled. I have a feeling that Jonathan's not going to let him go completely unpunished. He saved you, so he won't kill him, but he'll still want to make sure he pays for saying what he said about you. Nancy felt that Rose was probably right. She doubted Gavin had saved her out of the goodness of his heart. He would have done it just to save his own skin, and he might still have harmed her, given half a chance. He had been kicked out of his own family, and he had no reason to take his anger out on Alexander, just because of Jonathan's hatred for him. He owed Jonathan nothing. Alexander, on the other hand, had committed a capital offense and was a wanted man all over the world. He had almost violated Nancy on a video call to her husband. So Jonathan would obviously have wanted to get his revenge on him if he hadn't died already. But Gavin had saved Nancy, and Jonathan had seen him do it. He had done him a favor, and he would probably want it to be repaid one day. Nancy felt exhausted. The whole ordeal had lasted a couple of hours, but she felt as if she had almost used up all of her physical and mental strength. "Rose, will you let Esther and the others know that I'm safe?" she asked. "Sure." Rose took out her phone and called Esther, who had been worried sick about her friend. Nancy told the driver to take them to Jonathan's old place, which was only a short drive away. As soon as they arrived, she took a shower. She scrubbed herself all over and washed her hair thoroughly to remove all traces of Alexander from her body. Her injured wrists and ankles stung in the soapy water. When she came out, Rose was waiting for her with a tube of ointment to treat the sores. Rose applied the ointment and bandaged the wounds as carefully as she could. "There, is that better?" Nancy smiled gratefully. "You're so careful, Rose, but you don't have to treat me like a delicate flower." She tentatively touched the bandage on her left wrist. "Did you get injured much when you were in training?" "My skin's as tough as old boots, and I'm pretty thick-skinned, so I coped well enough." Nancy shook her head incredulously. "How can a lovely girl like you think she has tough skin?" "It's all the practice I've done over the years," Rose replied with a chuckle. "In fact, I have to practice a few defensive techniques with you tomorrow. We've both still got a long way to go. I was always lazy when Jonathan tried to teach me." She paused for a moment. "When you were taking a shower, I contacted the airport in Seattle. Jonathan's plane has already taken off, so he should be here in about 5 hours' time. It's getting late, so why don't you go and get some sleep before he gets here? I'll stay the night in the guest room." "That sounds great." Nancy got to her feet and headed for the bedroom. She had chosen to stay at Jonathan's old place because Jacob was at their villa, and she didn't want to worry him about what had happened. She pulled back the covers and lay down on the bed. A heavy feeling came over her from all the directions. It was a lie to say that she was no longer afraid. She still didn't know what Gavin had planned, but if he hadn't turned up when he had, she couldn't bear to think what might have happened. The thought kept coming back to haunt her. She hugged the blanket tightly under her chin and tried her best to calm her emotions. She tossed and turned for a while, her thoughts a chaotic mess. But eventually, her exhaustion got the better of her, and she fell asleep. At some point in the night, she sensed an arm gently pulling her into an embrace. Her immediate reaction was to push the person away, worried that it was someone who wanted to abuse her. But then, she smelled the familiar scent of Jonathan's cologne, and she relaxed into his embrace. Jonathan gazed down at the woman in his arms. He was careful not to hug her too tightly, but he wanted to make sure she felt safe with him. He recalled the fear that he had felt when he saw the scene on his phone screen. She was a strong person, but he wasn't sure she would have been able to go on if Alexander had forced himself onto her. And even if he had, what would he have done afterward? He wondered. Would he have killed her? He shuddered at the thought, and for the first time in his life, he realized how fragile life was. He had been so busy recently flying all over the U.S., but the flight he had taken to be back with his wife had been the longest of all. The adrenaline was still pumping through his veins, preventing him from feeling sleepy. He remembered the look in her eyes when Alexander had tried to remove her clothes. It had been a look of utter despair. Then, afterward, her eyes filled with tears, but he had seen that she was trying to fight them back. As Jonathan lay in the bed beside her, his heart was a mess. Hugging her was the only way to relieve the tension in his body. He gently kissed Nancy's cheek and whispered, "I'm so glad I didn't lose you. Otherwise, I don't know what I would have done." He thought, would I have gone to Cuba and massacred the lot of them? Would I have been driven crazy and ended up 6 feet under with you? Again, he shuddered at the intrusive thought and tried to push it out of his mind. Nancy slept until almost noon the following day. It wasn't like her to sleep for so long, but her ordeal had taken its toll, and she needed the rest. When she awoke, her whole body felt sore and weak, but then she realized that there was someone in the bed with her. She looked up and saw Jonathan's angular face. His eyes were closed, and she assumed he was asleep. He obviously hadn't shaved the previous day, and his chin was covered with a dark shadow of stubble that scratched her forehead. He seemed to sense that she was awake, and he opened his eyes. Loosening his embrace slightly, he leaned forward and kissed her on the end of her nose. They gazed into each other's eyes for a long moment. "Hey, honey," he whispered. Nancy murmured her response. Then, the memory of the previous day's ordeal flooded back, and her eyes teared up. Jonathan kissed her forehead, her eyes, the tip of her nose, and finally, her lips. His kiss was light, and it gave her a feeling of comfort and safety that drove away her fear and sadness bit by bit. They lay in silence in each other's arms for several more minutes. Then, Jonathan asked, "Are you hungry?" Nancy hadn't thought about food at all, but at the mention of it, she suddenly realized just how hungry she was. And as if she needed affirmation, her stomach growled, and they both laughed. "I haven't eaten a thing since yesterday morning. I completely lost my appetite." "That's not really surprising," he replied, and again he felt a pang of guilt. "I'm so sorry. I wasn't there to protect you." "It's okay." She stroked his cheek affectionately. "I'm never going to let anything happen to you ever again." His face was as serious as his tone of voice. "I'm never going to let anything happen to you ever again. Whether it's you or our baby, I won't put either of you in such danger again." Nancy had forgotten about their baby conversation, and she bristled at the mention. She pushed him away. "I'm really tired, honey. I can't think about that right now." "All right, take your time. Let me know when you're ready to talk about it." He laid his head back down on the pillow and sighed. Then, he seemed to think of something, and he added, "Actually, forget that. You won't take the initiative to tell me, so I'm going to ask you every morning and every night." Nancy sat up in bed and glared at him. Jonathan grinned back and hopped out of bed. "I'll go fix us some breakfast." He quickly got dressed and then skipped downstairs to the kitchen. Nancy rolled over onto her side and pulled the covers up around her ears. After a while, she started to feel a little stronger, so she slowly dragged herself out of bed and got dressed. 10 minutes later, the two of them sat opposite each other at the dining table and ate their breakfast. "Where's Rose?" Nancy asked, suddenly remembering that Jonathan's niece had been with her the night before. "She said she was going to stay in the guest room." "She had to go to school. She had an early class this morning." Nancy nodded, remembering that it was after midday, and Rose had probably been up for hours already. "It sounds like she's got a lot on her plate. She said she was going to practice some defense techniques with me today." "Yeah, it'll be good for you to do some exercise. But when you're pregnant, you'll have to take it easy." Nancy tensed up again at the mention of a baby, but she chose not to say anything about it. "So what are your plans with Gavin?" she asked instead. Just as Nancy had anticipated, Jonathan's eyes filled with bitterness at the mention of Gavin's name. The man had actually confessed to wanting his wife in front of him. He couldn't let him get away with that. "If he thinks he's safe in Cuba, he's got another thing coming," he thought. But to Nancy, he said, "I haven't decided yet." The spoon in Nancy's hand trembled, and she stared into her cereal bowl. Jonathan frowned. "You don't feel sorry for him, do you?" "No, of course not." She shook her head. "I know he saved me just to save himself. But at the end of the day, the fact is that he did save me. I don't want to repay kindness with ingratitude." Jonathan sighed, put down his spoon, and looked her firmly in the eye. "Do you know what he wants me to do in return?" Nancy thought she had a pretty good idea. "I guess he wants you to help him find a way back into the Sloan family so that he can be the heir again." Jonathan's expression soured. Gavin knows his limitations, and he knows I would never agree to help him. And he knows I would never agree to help him become the heir to his family again. But he asked me to put in a good word for him with Carter, so that he'll at least be allowed back into the family. Nancy nodded. That's true. He also knows that Xavier's your close friend. There's nothing else you can do. Did you agree to help him then? I called Xavier first and explained the situation. If Gavin returns to his family, it'll impact him the most. And what did he say? Nancy asked. He agreed. Gavin's part of the Sloan family after all. That'll never change. And Xavier's not afraid of a little competition. So, I sent Gavin back to Cuba this morning. I'll go later today. He didn't want to tell her that he had challenged Gavin to a fistfight the night before. He had beaten him until his face was swollen beyond recognition. Jonathan wondered how Carter would react when he saw his grandson. After the fight, he returned home and took a shower, as if nothing had happened. Nancy didn't suspect a thing, since Jonathan had told her he would send someone else to deal with Gavin. I'm going to Cuba with you, she said softly. He was thoughtful. Do you want to tell Harold about Maria? She nodded. When Esther was in the hospital, I went to see him. He told me he couldn't imagine ever having a child. But I saw the look in his eyes. He didn't fool me. Jonathan nodded. Okay, then it's settled. You're coming with me. Nancy sighed. I inherited Maria's body. The least I can do is take care of her family. She thought about Maria's siblings. Henry's grades were improving at school, and he and Jacob had become friends. Angela had finally met someone and would probably get married and have kids soon. Even though she wasn't madly in love, her fiancé was kind and supportive. She seemed content with her life and liked her job. Maria's fate, however, had been devastating, and she had died at the age of 21 without ever experiencing what life had to offer. She had been desperate for fatherly love all her young life, and Nancy wanted to make it up to her. She and Jonathan boarded a plane to Cuba later that day. The swelling on her arm and ankles had already reduced considerably, and she was feeling much better. Matthew knew they were coming and had arranged everything for their stay, so they went straight to the Davidsons when they arrived. They would go to see the Sloans the following day. That evening, Matthew found out that Alexander was dead. He was heartbroken, but knew there was nothing he could have done to prevent it. He woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, remembering the son he had raised. He stared out of the window and saw a bright moon in the sky. Chills ran down his spine when he realized he would never see Alexander again. He suddenly regretted not paying more attention to him and questioned the decisions he had made in the recent past. He grabbed his cell phone off the nightstand and called his assistant. Is everything okay with Latham? Does Jonathan know where we're holding him? He asked. Everything's fine. No one knows where he is. Matthew was relieved and lay down. He knew Jonathan and Latham had grown up together and had a strong bond. Even though Latham wasn't family like Ashley, as long as Matthew had Latham, Jonathan wouldn't dare do anything to him. He closed his eyes and slept soundly. The next morning, Jonathan called Carter and told him that he and Nancy wanted to go over and see him and the rest of the family. Carter was puzzled, wondering why they wanted to visit them when Xavier wasn't there. He suspected it had something to do with Gavin. He asked his housekeeper to prepare pastries and coffee. Jonathan and Nancy arrived in the afternoon, bringing gifts from New York City. Is Harold here? Nancy asked, looking around. He's down by the waterfront, painting, Carter replied. I'll ask the housekeeper to get him. Jonathan shook his head. Don't bother. We'd love to look at his painting. He and Nancy walked down to the waterfront. Carter frowned when he realized they were there to see Harold and followed them, curious to find out what they wanted. Harold was painting a portrait of a young woman and looked up from his easel as they approached. He put down his paintbrush and wiped his hands with a cloth. "Hello, Jonathan. Maria. What a lovely surprise. When did you arrive?" "Good to see you, Harold. We arrived yesterday," Jonathan replied. He examined the portrait and whistled. "This is some work of art." Nancy nodded in agreement. "Can you teach me to paint like that?" She had taken art classes at school in her previous life, but she hadn't touched a paintbrush in over 10 years, and she suddenly felt nostalgic. Harold handed her the paintbrush. "Here, why don't you practice a few strokes?" She dipped the brush into some paint and dabbed at the picture, trying to do justice to it. Her painting was childish and amateur, though. "I'm afraid I'm not as talented as you are," she told Harold apologetically. "I studied painting at school, but I was never good at it. It feels strange to be holding a brush again." He smiled. "Practice makes perfect. You're not that bad. I'd be happy to teach you if you have some free time." Her eyes lit up. "It's a deal." Harold felt inexplicably drawn to her. Though he lived well and enjoyed painting, he was often lonely. He wondered why Maria was so nice to him and wished she was more than just an acquaintance. He pushed the thought away. "I shouldn't let my imagination get the better of me," he thought, angry with himself. "She doesn't even live in Cuba." But when he looked at her, he couldn't help feeling that they shared some kind of special bond. He almost felt like she was family, like she was a daughter to him. Harold shook his head in frustration. "How could I think Maria's my daughter?" he wondered. "It's absolutely ridiculous. Barely even know her." He took a deep breath and willed himself not to daydream, but his thoughts kept drifting back to that day when she had asked him whether he would like to have a daughter. He had never thought about it before, but it was something that had preoccupied him for the past several weeks and made him incredibly sad. Carter was listening to the conversation impatiently. "Okay, that's enough chit-chat. Why don't we go inside? Our housekeeper has prepared pastries and coffee." Jonathan turned to look at him, wishing he would leave so that he and Nancy could speak to Harold in private. He was skeptical about revealing the truth about Maria to Harold in front of Carter, whom he knew would never believe them, even if they produced a DNA report. Nancy was now holding the paintbrush as Harold slowly guided her hand movements on the canvas. Jonathan was surprised by how powerful their connection was, but he thought that even if Nancy were inside Maria's body, Maria's blood would be flowing through her veins. She must feel something. Jonathan cleared his throat. "Harold, I want to tell you why we're here." Nancy froze with the paintbrush in her hand before turning around to face them with a nervous expression. "Have you ever noticed this striking resemblance between you and Maria?" Jonathan asked Harold. Carter's eyes narrowed. "What the heck are you talking about?" "I suspect that Maria may be Harold's biological daughter." Harold stared at him in wide astonishment. "I did a bit of digging and discovered that you went to the States more than 20 years ago," Jonathan continued. "Maria's mother became pregnant with her soon after you arrived there. I asked Maria and her siblings to do a DNA test, and it turns out that Maria's biological father isn't Chris Miller." Carter couldn't believe his ears and turned angrily to his son. "Did you have an affair with Maria's mother?" Harold was shaking. He looked down at the ground in shame and slowly nodded. "Yes, I did." A silence descended on the group. Harold turned to look at Nancy and suddenly realized that Jonathan was right. There was a striking resemblance between them. His heart began to pound, and he felt an intense pain in his chest. "Maria, is this true? Are you my daughter?" he whispered in a trembling voice. Nancy just smiled weakly and nodded. "Jonathan and I suspected as much, so that's why we came to Cuba. We were wondering if you could do a DNA test to confirm." Carter's mind was reeling. If Maria is Harold's daughter, our family is related to the Davidsons through marriage. And once Xavier marries Esther Williams, our ties to Cuba's ruling elite will be secured. No matter how he looked at it, this latest revelation was great news for the Sloanes. I'll organize the DNA test for Harold and Maria immediately, he said. Just wait right here. In the meantime, because this is a sensitive topic, we can't let anyone know until we get the results back. Jonathan nodded. I agree. Carter left, and Harold stood looking at Nancy with excitement. My dreams have come true, he thought. I can finally be a father and mentor. He couldn't imagine how he would feel if the DNA test revealed that she wasn't his daughter. But he pushed that thought aside and focused on how happy he felt at that moment. He tried to express his feelings, but no words came out. Nancy smiled warmly at him to show him that she was equally moved. This is what a father's love feels like, she thought, suddenly missing her own father, who had passed away 4 years ago. I did this for myself as much as for Maria. To alleviate the awkwardness, she picked up the brush and continued painting. Harold went up to her and gently took her hand in his, showing her the brush strokes. They were both silent, but their actions spoke volumes. Jonathan crossed his arms and smiled, touched by the scene. Carter returned a few minutes later. I called our private clinic, and they said we could go over right away for the DNA test. I swore them to secrecy, so we don't need to worry about the results being leaked. Half an hour later, they arrived at the clinic, where a nurse drew blood from Nancy and Harold. The samples were sent away to a lab nearby, and they were told the results would be ready the following day. As they left the clinic, they bumped into Gavin, who was surprised to see them. He greeted the group, and then he quickly left. What happened to his face? Did he get into a fight? Nancy asked. He was probably attacked by some thugs in New York, Carter said. Who knows what mess he got himself into again? Nancy didn't doubt it. She looked at her husband, who appeared unconcerned by the matter. They returned to the house, and Carter invited Jonathan and Nancy to stay for dinner. As they left, he patted his son on the shoulder. I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm proud of you. Harold turned red with embarrassment and smiled happily. Jonathan went to see Matthew as soon as he and Nancy returned to the Davidsons that evening. He told him everything, because he was certain the DNA test would confirm his suspicions, and the Sloanes would want the world to know. Matthew didn't seem at all surprised by the news. I guess Harold must be very happy. It's going to benefit their family. Jonathan raised his eyebrows, wondering whether Matthew had also suspected that Harold was Maria's father. He knew that even if he had, he wouldn't have said anything, because if Nancy was related to the Sloanes, it would only strengthen Jonathan's position and undermine his own. Jonathan decided to move on to another topic. I want to know how Latham's doing. Matthew sighed. He's doing very well. We're treating him like a king. You don't need to worry about your good friend. Jonathan laughed. You make it sound as if he's enjoying himself. I'll let you in on a little secret. If someone treats my family or friends well, I return the favor. But if they do something to hurt the people I care about, I can be ruthless. I was hoping you would keep him hostage for a while. That's why I let him come to Cuba. Matthew was stunned. You mean this was part of a plan? Jonathan nodded. He let my sister down, and he deserved to be taught a lesson. But I think he suffered enough. Let him go. He looked meaningfully at Matthew. That's for me to decide, Matthew said, returning his gaze. You're in Cuba now. You can't just do whatever you please. I hope you're not threatening me. You also know what I'm capable of. Look at what happened to Alexander and all the people who tried to destroy me. None of them survived. His tone sent shivers down Matthew's spine. It's late. You should get some rest, Jonathan said. Think about what I said. He went back to his room and mulled over the events of the past few weeks. He had been honest with Matthew. Latham had paid the price for what he had done to Ashley, and it was time to release him. When Ashley had been kidnapped, Jonathan had done everything in his power to find her, but had been unable to locate her whereabouts. His men were still searching for her when Latham had sacrificed himself for her release. Norman had allowed Latham onto the boat that had been bound for Cuba and had only told Jonathan about it when they had pulled up to the harbor. Jonathan had been worried for Latham's safety, so he had asked Norman to secretly place Eduardo's tracking device on Latham. Though the signal was poor, Jonathan had been able to pinpoint Latham's approximate location and knew he was at Matthew's villa. He had left him to remain captive there to give Ashley a chance to recover and get over him. He knew how she felt about Latham and hoped she would eventually forget him and rebuild her life. Jonathan had made sure that things continued to run smoothly at Latham's company while he was in Cuba, pondering over his feelings for Ashley. If Latham was in love with her and wanted to pursue her after his release, Jonathan wouldn't get in his way. If not, at least she would be strong enough to move on by the time he returned. That was Jonathan's thinking. He knew he couldn't pressure Latham into dating his half-sister. He could only patiently wait for him to decide how he felt. Later that night, Dr. Chang called Jonathan with some exciting news. Jonathan, sorry to bother you at this late hour, but I had to tell you that I finally developed the medication that will help treat Ashley's condition. He had gone to the medical auction to procure the required ingredients, and Dr. Chang had spent weeks conducting experiments and trying out various formulas. He sighed with relief. That's great news, Doctor. I'm in Cuba at the moment. Just hang on until I get back, and I'll bring Ashley to see you. After the conversation, Jonathan called her. What's wrong? Do you realize what time it is? She asked in a sleepy voice. Remember Dr. Chang? He just called to tell me that your medication is ready. I'll be back next week to take you to see him. He'll have to do another physical exam. Of course, Ashley said. I almost forgot about it, to tell you the truth. I've been so preoccupied lately, and I'm feeling okay. How are things with you? Are you busy at the office? Things are pretty good. I told everyone that I was absent because I was sick, and they've been spoiling me ever since. Jonathan laughed. You deserve it. There is something I want to tell you. Oh, what is it? He asked, afraid that she had found out about Latham. My father, or should I say Louis, called me this morning and told me he wants to arrange for me to meet someone. You mean a blind date? That's right. He had dinner the other night with a business partner who has a son about my age, and he's single. Do you know anything about the guy? Only that he's originally from Houston and recently turned 28. Ashley said, he's never been married. You should ask Rock to go with you, Jonathan suggested. Do you think I should go? Ashley asked. I'm not ready to get involved with anyone yet, and it wouldn't be fair to the guy. You have nothing to lose, Jonathan said. It's only a date, and if you don't like him, you don't have to see him again. It's as simple as that. And if he causes any trouble, you can call me. Just give him a chance. You may end up liking him. At the very least, it may turn into a friendship. She took a deep breath. Okay, I guess I can go. I'll give my dad a call and tell him. After the conversation, she sent a message to Louis. Hey, Dad. I decided to go on that blind date, but I'm not promising anything. Louis was happy that she had agreed, though it wasn't nearly as important to him as Brock's engagement to Lindsay. A good relationship with the Pullmans was crucial to his business's success. and his son's upcoming nuptials would seal the deal. If Ashley married Edwin's son, it would merely be icing on the cake. He messaged her back. Great. I'll arrange it then. Speak tomorrow. Lots of love. Ashley groaned, wondering what she had gotten herself into. He texted her the following day at lunchtime with the details of the time and place for the date. She read the messages and realized that the blind date was that weekend. That same day, Carter called Nancy and Jonathan to tell them the DNA results were ready. They met at the clinic, where the doctor handed Carter an envelope. He grabbed it with trembling hands and removed the document inside. He quickly scanned the contents, and then he skipped to the end. He had been preparing mentally all day for the results of the paternity test. But it was still shocking to see them in black and white print. Harold stood over his shoulder, squinting at the piece of paper. What is it, Dad? I can't see a thing. He leaned in and took a closer look. His breath caught in his throat when he read the last sentence. The 2 blood samples revealed a 99% probability that he was Maria's biological father. Harold suddenly felt dizzy, and he grabbed the back of Carter's chair for support. The doctor was saying something, but he couldn't hear him. His eyes were locked onto that last sentence. He blinked a few times and wiped the tears from his eyes. He then took a deep breath and looked at Nancy. Though the results confirmed what she had known for a long time, she also teared up when she saw his face. She was overcome with emotion, not knowing what to say. Jonathan squeezed her hand, whispering, "Go over and hug your dad." She nodded, but stayed rooted to the spot. Harold took a few steps forward and extended his arms. "Maria, my daughter," he said in a trembling voice. Nancy took a deep breath and threw herself into his arms. Hugging him felt strange, and it took her a while to call him father. She looked up at his warm brown eyes and white hair. She couldn't believe he was the man who made Maria. When she called him father again, he burst into tears and hugged her tighter. The last time he had cried so hard was when his girlfriend had passed away many years ago. "Maria, my daughter," he kept repeating. Nancy was also in tears. She wished the real Maria could know why the man who had raised her had never loved her. "It's not that you weren't good enough. It's just that he was never your real father," she thought. "Your real father loves you, and you've made him so happy. This is real." They continued hugging for a long time. Nancy finally pulled away and rubbed her eyes, embarrassed. "Welcome to our family, Maria," Carter said. "You're a Sloan now." He turned to his son. "Harold, I think we should throw a huge party to celebrate this wonderful news. I want the whole world to know that Maria is part of our family." Normally, Harold hated big gatherings and formal occasions, but looking at his daughter standing in front of him, he couldn't wait to show her off to all their friends. She was smart, beautiful, talented, and sensible. Everything he had always wanted in a child. He decided then that he would make up for lost time and spend as much time as he could with her. While Nancy and Harold celebrated their new relationship, Carter and Jonathan discussed what this would mean for their families. When the group finally left the clinic, Nancy and Harold strolled down the main street arm in arm, smiling at each other and not knowing what to say. Her father finally asked, "What was your childhood like? I know so little about you." Nancy remembered a few stories from Maria's past and recounted the funniest ones. She told him how she had never wanted to eat her lunch at kindergarten and had always hidden her food under various objects in the room. "It was hilarious," she said, laughing. "It took my kindergarten teacher a long time to figure out why there were always ants all over the place." Harold leaned in and listened attentively to her stories, afraid of missing a single detail. "Tell me about your family. Did you get along with your siblings when you were young? How did your parents treat you?" he asked after a while. My sister and brother were good to me. We've always had a loving relationship. I'll take you to the States one day so you could meet them." He nodded enthusiastically. "Our mother left when we were very young, so I have few memories of her. She became very ill last year, and I was able to see her before she passed away." Harold's affair with Maria's mother had been so long ago, and he only had vague memories of her. He recalled that she had been incredibly beautiful. "And what about Chris, the man who raised you?" he asked. Nancy's eyes narrowed. "He was always a nasty piece of work. He only cared about himself and considers women to be inferior to men. He wanted me to marry someone I didn't love just because the marriage would benefit his business. Soon after, his company was forced to shut down due to some shady dealings he got involved in." Harold nodded in sympathy. He knew plenty of people like Chris in Cuba. "Where is he now?" "In jail, where he belongs," she replied bitterly. His heart went out to her for all that she had suffered. "Maria, I blame myself for what you went through. I wasn't there for you, but I didn't even know you existed." He wished he could have saved her from such a terrible childhood and vowed to confront Chris one day. "It's okay, Dad. How could you have known I was your daughter? Besides, things turned out well for me in the end. I'm happily married to Jonathan, and I'm part of his family now. I love my work, and I'm surrounded by close friends." "I'm so glad I found out about you now. We have plenty of time to get to know each other." When they arrived home, Harold took Nancy to his studio to show her his collection of paintings. She had never seen so many stunning works of art. Some were very old paintings from famous painters, while others were more recent. His own paintings hung on the wall at the back of the room. He showed each one to her proudly. "Look at this painting. It's from the 1900s. The painter was Polish. See the details on the tiger and the jungle? It's magnificent." She listened to his explanations attentively, amazed by his knowledge and expertise. She had never studied art seriously and had been preoccupied with music lessons and languages at school. Though she had dabbled in painting, she knew very little about its history. She felt that a new world was opening up to her. After he showed her the last piece, she said teasingly, "Dad, you're so talented. I'm very impressed." Harold gave her an adoring look. He had never known what the bond between a father and daughter felt like. It was fresh and genuine. He laughed. "It's just a hobby. Do you like the paintings? Which one would you like to take home? I can pack them up and have them shipped to your house so you can hang them in your study." She smiled. "I already have some oil paintings in my study, but they're not as precious as these. I wouldn't want you to part with them. I can look at them whenever I come visit you." "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Absolutely. Your paintings belong here, where you can look at them and appreciate them with an artist's eye. I'm afraid I'm just an amateur." "You're not an amateur, Maria. Everyone has a certain talent. Look at what you've done in the gaming industry. I watched the video of your launch event the other day. You're a pro. Developing the first ever holographic video game is a big deal. I'm so proud of you." She could see how excited he was about the game. "Your company has shaken up the industry," he continued. "It's all anyone talks about here in Cuba. Did I tell you I went out and got myself a VR headset as soon as it was on the market? I stood in line outside the store with all the gaming geeks." Nancy was stunned. "Dad, didn't know you were into video games." He shook his head. "I'm not, but I really wanted to try Creation when it launched. I watched all your interviews on TV, and it got me hyped up about this whole holographic VR experience." "Then we're definitely related," Nancy teased. "I'd be happy to teach you how to play." "It's a deal. I'll teach you how to paint. Come to think of it, I also have an impressive stamp collection I want to show you. I've been a collector for several decades. Many of my antique stamps are rare and priceless. I even have one that dates back to the 17th century. She laughed. Don't tell me you want to give them to me. I'd be happy to. I can always collect more. She hugged him. It's enough just to show them to me, Dad. You're part of me now, and I'll always come back to see you. Harold was overjoyed at the thought of seeing more of her, though he insisted on giving her something so that she would be reminded of him when she returned home. They joined Jonathan and Carter in the living room a while later. Can I call you Dad now, too? Jonathan joked, going up to Harold and shaking his hand. He turned to Nancy. Do you want to go back to the Davidsons with me, or do you plan on staying here? Harold frowned. It was clear he wanted her to stay, but didn't want to pressure her. Seeing his expression, she replied, Why don't both of us stay here for a while? Harold's eyes lit up. Of course! We'd love your company. We can put you up in one of the guest bedrooms. They drank coffee in the afternoon, and then Jonathan headed off to the Sumoku Corporation's office to attend some business while Nancy stayed behind. Harold was afraid that she might be bored sitting around the house and suggested they go downtown to take a walk and do some shopping. That sounds great, she said. I've been here so many times, but I haven't seen much of Havana's city center yet. He summoned 2 of his bodyguards, and they drove downtown in his car. Harold took Nancy to the 3rd floor of a large shopping mall, which had several high-end boutiques. You'll love the clothes here, he told her excitedly. They're made by some of the top Cuban designers. You won't find them anywhere else. He pulled her into one of the stores, where a saleswoman approached them with a huge smile. Good afternoon. Can I help you? Would you like to see our latest collection of dresses? Thank you. We're just browsing, Nancy replied. But she already had plenty of the latest designer clothes, and her closet was full of items she hardly wore. But seeing Harold's joyful expression, she didn't want to hurt his feelings. Oh well, I guess I could use a few more dresses, she thought. She walked over to one of the racks to pick something out. Harold waited outside the upmarket boutique clothing store while Nancy browsed through the latest collection. He knew that women preferred to try on clothing before purchasing it, so he gave her the time and space she needed. He had instructed a female bodyguard to accompany Nancy into the dressing room because she had told him about her phobia caused by the terrible incident with Alexander just a few days ago. Since the incident, she had always ensured that a female bodyguard checked the dressing room first before she went in. Nancy had spotted a beautiful autumn coat and decided to slip it over her shoulders. The coat accentuated her slim figure, and she looked like a runway model. She looked at herself in a full-length mirror and smiled happily. Harold had been watching her through the window and quickly entered the store to compliment her. Maria, you look beautiful. She blushed slightly. She knew that people like Harold rarely complimented anyone, yet he had complimented her several times that day. Smiling, she turned to the sales assistant. I'll take this one. The sales assistant nodded. The clothing in the boutique was very expensive, and they usually only sold 1 or 2 items a day. Nancy had the perfect figure, and the sales assistant knew she'd look good in anything. She quickly fetched a pair of wide-legged pants and handed them to Nancy. You have such a lovely tall and slender figure. These pants will look amazing with the coat. Nancy contemplated the idea for a while. Okay, I'll try them on quickly. Harold was happy to spoil his long-lost daughter and didn't care how much he spent on her. The bodyguard checked the dressing room and gestured to Nancy that it was safe for her to use. She disappeared into the cubicle and came out shortly after wearing the wide-legged pants. The sales assistant gasped. That looks incredible! A few other ladies tried the jacket with the pants, but they didn't have the figure for it. It suits you well. It's like the collection was specially designed for you. Harold beamed with pride. She'll take everything. Please ring it up. Nancy returned to the dressing room to get changed before handing the clothing to the sales assistant to fold and pack into a fancy shopping bag. Just as she was about to fold the jacket, a woman grabbed it out of her hands. Everyone was puzzled. The woman was thin and seemed miserable. Her makeup was immaculate, but it failed to hide her acne. She glared at the sales assistant. "Why have you sold this coat? I fitted it earlier and liked it, so I told you to reserve it for me." She ignored Nancy and Harold. All the other sizes had already been purchased, and it was the last jacket in the store. The sales assistant recognized the woman. "Miss Thompson, I'm so sorry about this. I know you tried it on, but I didn't keep the jacket aside for you because you never paid the reservation deposit." Before the sales assistant could say anything, the woman interrupted her. "How much do I spend in this store every year? I don't think you can even calculate it. This is outrageous. I went outside for 10 minutes to make a phone call, and you sold it to someone else." She glared at Nancy and Harold before turning back toward the sales assistant. "You're so eager to make a sale that you would sell your best collection to any random person who walks in. This is unacceptable." Nancy almost burst out laughing at the young woman's audacity. She was about to say something when Harold spoke sternly. "Excuse me, miss. I think you better be careful of what you say." Although he didn't show any anger, he was also not about to be bullied by a fresh-faced young woman over a coat. He handed the sales assistant his black bank card. "You can go ahead and swipe it." The sales assistant hesitated. The man seemed to be in his 40s and had to be successful if he carried a black card. But he also seemed plain and unassuming, and wasn't even wearing any branded clothing. She had also never seen him in the store before and assumed he was just a man who wanted to spoil his mistress with fancy designer outfits. The sales assistant decided to come up with a solution to the situation. She smiled politely. "I'm so sorry, sir. Miss Thompson did tell me she wanted to purchase the coat. I shouldn't have put it back on the rack. So, unfortunately, I cannot sell you the coat, but I can offer you a discount on the pair of pants your girlfriend has chosen. Perhaps a 50% discount would be satisfactory?" A 50% discount was a good offer. The store didn't typically give discounts unless the customer was a regular, like Miss Thompson. The shop assistant expected Harold to agree and was taken aback by his response. "Firstly, she's my daughter, not my girlfriend. And secondly, I won't accept a discount in exchange for the jacket. My daughter doesn't have to give something she likes to another woman. We don't have to pay for your mistakes." Shocked, the sales assistant turned to Miss Thompson. "I'm sorry, Miss Thompson. The gentleman insists on buying the jacket." The young woman had been patiently waiting for her to resolve the problem, and she burst out in a fit of rage. "You must be joking. Do these two beggars think they can do this to me?" She turned to face Harold. "Okay, how much money do you want? I'll give you cash equivalent to the price of the coat. Then you and your daughter can go somewhere more affordable and get a different one." Nancy didn't expect Harold to argue against her, and she was about to intervene when he turned to the shop assistant. "I'll pay you 3 times as much as the advertised price for the coat." The shop assistant was stunned, but Miss Thompson wouldn't hear of it. "Are you joking? Aren't you afraid of spending all of your money? I'll pay 5 times more for the coat." Harold scoffed. "Is that so? In that case, I'll pay 10 times as much." Nancy gawked at Harold and Miss Thompson. She was shocked that her father had no problem throwing money at the situation. She tugged on his sleeve to get him to stop. She didn't want to lower herself to such a level, especially over a coat. She couldn't stand people like the sales assistant who didn't have the spine to take a stand. She also didn't want the boutique to profit from such an awkward situation. Harold lost his temper. It was the first time he had taken his daughter out, and he wanted to spoil her. He didn't want to argue with a stranger, especially in a clothing store. He wasn't about to change his mind, and he continued to bid against Miss Thompson. Nancy heard her phone ring and quickly left the store, grateful to get away. It was Jonathan calling. "Hi, Maria. Where are you now? Hi, my darling. I'm out shopping with my dad. We've run into some trouble with another customer over a coat, but it seems like my dad can stand his ground. Jonathan frowned. Which store? Nancy sighed. It's a boutique in the mall. I'll send you the location quickly. Jonathan waited for the location to display on his phone. I'm close by. Wait for me there, and I'll find you. He had gone to inspect one of the Sumoco dealerships that had happened to be across the street from the mall, where the boutique clothing store was located. Nancy hung up and returned to the store, only to hear Miss Thompson say that she was prepared to pay almost 20 times as much as the original price for the coat. The shop assistant gasped and wondered if Harold could afford to pay even more than that. Sir, with all due respect, if you don't have the money, please refrain from showing off in front of your daughter like this. If you don't stop, I'll have no choice but to ask you to leave. Harold felt his blood boil and was about to explode when two male customers entered the store. They had heard the commotion and were curious, but they gasped in astonishment when they saw Nancy. Excuse me, are you Maria Davis of Brightstar? Nancy nodded, puzzled. I am. Is there something wrong? Really? This is unbelievable. Who would have thought we'd run into you here of all places? The two young men laughed excitedly, and one searched for his phone in his bag. Please, Mrs. Davis, can we take a photo with you? We're huge Brightstar fans. Nancy smiled. Of course. They stood on either side of Nancy and passed the phone to the shop assistant to take the photo. Please take a photo for us. The sales assistant obliged, but shook her head in confusion. She tried to remember if there was anyone in the city with the name Davis, but no one came to mind. The two fans gushed over Nancy. Brightstar's latest game creation is phenomenal. We were so excited the day it was released. We even waited in a queue for almost 2 days to buy the virtual reality goggles. Yeah, we love your games. I don't know if you've seen how everyone raves about your games on the online gaming chat groups. Nancy grinned. Thank you so much for the compliment. I'm so happy to hear that you enjoy the games we make. Finally, the shop assistant realized who Nancy was. Everyone knew about Creation. It was the hottest game of the year. It was the first holographic online game, and it was pure magic. It was like science fiction and reality had merged into a new world. It had also been said that the head of Brightstar had accumulated a net worth of millions of dollars after her company went public on the stock exchange. Her wealth increased daily as millions of gamers worldwide downloaded and played the games developed by Brightstar. The sales assistant quickly searched for Maria Davis on her phone. She gasped and suddenly felt terrible for taking Mrs. Thompson's side. She had thought that Nancy and her dad weren't rich enough to afford the clothing in the store, and was shocked to discover that she had been rude to one of the wealthiest women in America. She nervously tried to think of something to salvage the situation when a few more customers entered the store. A man dressed in a smart suit walked in first, followed by 8 other men. The man in the suit was handsome and refined. He seemed very powerful, and the men behind him appeared to be his bodyguards. They wore suits and sunglasses, and they were strong and muscular. The sales assistant gawked at the man in the suit. Something was alluring about him. He quickly walked to the counter. Nancy seemed to have sensed his presence and turned her head. Their eyes locked for a second, and she was about to greet him when one of her fans rushed toward Jonathan. Mr. Davis, I can't believe my luck. I've just met your wife, and now you're here too. I work for the Sumoco Corporation. When Jonathan was appointed as CEO of the Sumoco Corporation, he delivered a speech to its employees. Everyone had attended, from the low-level factory workers to the high-flying executives. The young man suddenly thought of something. I didn't skip work. I'm on vacation this week. Jonathan nodded and walked up to Nancy. Hi, Maria. Did you find anything you like? He nodded at Harold. Good afternoon, Dad. Jonathan didn't speak loudly, but it was loud enough for everyone else in the store to overhear him. The sales assistant was astonished. The Davidson family owned the mall. Although they mainly specialized in the motor vehicle and finance sectors, they'd also ventured into many other industries such as property development, real estate, tourism, entertainment, and retail. She looked at Jonathan and immediately realized he had taken over the Sumoku Corporation. She had also heard rumors that the head of the Davidson family intended to hand over the reins to him. It was hot gossip, because he had effectively pushed the three Davidson sons out of running the family business. The shop assistant took a deep breath to calm her nerves. The Davidson family had a reputation for being cruel and ruthless. Nobody wanted to cause trouble with them. Before she could think of something to say, Nancy began to speak. Her demeanor had changed from a powerful and bossy corporate woman to a meek and mild wife. "Darling, I wanted to buy this beautiful coat, but when my father tried to pay for it, another woman grabbed it and insisted that she buy it. The shop assistant said she'd give us a discount on a pair of pants to compensate for the mistake." She frowned and continued. "The woman insinuated that we were too poor to afford the clothing in this store and then tried to bribe the shop assistant." Nancy batted her eyelids coyly, as if she were pure and innocent. She wasn't going to stand for being bullied. She and Harold had planned a pleasant day out shopping, and the young woman had ruined her good mood. One of the young men looked at the shop assistant with indignance. "You can't be serious. Mrs. Davis is one of America's wealthiest businesswomen. She runs an enormous corporation. She could probably buy this entire mall if she wanted to. As for Miss Thompson, she's not as rich and famous as you think." The other young man nodded. "Yeah, aren't you the daughter of the Thompson family who manufactures car parts? Don't you know that your family relies on the continuous business with the Sumoku Corporation to stay alive? And did you know that Mrs. Davis's husband is the head of the Sumoku Corporation?" The two young men left Nancy stunned. They had put Miss Thompson in her place and upstaged Jonathan in the process. Miss Thompson's face turned pale and she began to tremble. She tossed the coat onto the counter and hurried out. She was suddenly terrified that her father would find out about what she had done. She was bound to be punished. Jonathan glared at the sales assistant. "Your attitude is highly unacceptable. How do you explain why you ridiculed my wife and her father in front of other customers?" The shop assistant felt as though she might faint. She looked at the floor and mumbled, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Davis. I didn't know that she was your wife." Jonathan laughed. "So, you're saying bullying her would have been okay if she wasn't? In my business, we believe the customer is always right, and we treat every customer with respect. Without them, there is no business. If that's your attitude, I don't think you're cut out to be a salesperson." The sales assistant's knees began to shake, and she didn't know how to respond. She apologized again and promised to be more mindful in the future. Jonathan had contacted the mall manager about the situation while on his way to the mall. The mall manager arrived at the boutique just as the sales assistant had finished apologizing. "Mr. and Mrs. Davis, and Mrs. Davis's father, please accept our humble apologies. We're so sorry for the trouble. We'd like to invite you upstairs for some refreshments." The mall manager turned toward the sales assistant and glared at her coldly. "Please go to the human relations manager to arrange your final paycheck. You're dismissed." Jonathan shook his head. "Thanks for the invitation, but we have a prior engagement to attend to." The mall manager hurried behind the counter and began to pack the jacket and pants into a bag. "Of course, yes, you're very busy." He handed the bag to Nancy. "Mrs. Davis, please accept my sincerest apology. We won't charge you for the clothing. Instead, we offer it to you as a gift. If you like anything else in the store, please feel free to add it to the bag." Nancy didn't want to take the bag, but Jonathan gave her a look that told her to accept it. "Thank you. I have enough clothing at home and don't need anything else. This will be all for now." The mall manager smiled apologetically. I understand. Well, we'll let you know when the next collection arrives and send you the catalog. Nancy smiled politely, and everyone left the store. As they walked through the mall, she leaned close to Jonathan. Why did you insist on me taking the clothing? Jonathan grinned. Because after all that commotion, you deserved it. Besides, I'm a capitalist. That's how things work. She laughed. I was worried that you would join Harold in trying to throw money at the sales assistant for the coat. She turned to Harold. Dad, you don't need to squander your money on me, even if you have it. Harold chuckled and gave her a warm smile. Jonathan excused himself because he still had to finish his inspection at the Sumoco Corporation's dealership across the road. Nancy packed her shopping bags into the car trunk, and she and Harold decided to take a break from shopping and have something to eat. Harold took her to one of his favorite restaurants that served the best local cuisine. Since most of her time in Cuba had been spent either with the Davidsons or Sloanes, where private chefs had prepared her meals, she hadn't had much chance to try authentic Cuban food. Harold ordered several items and began to explain what each dish consisted of. The shopping had made her hungry, and she excitedly awaited the food. The two watched the pedestrians and traffic pass by and chatted happily. The waiter soon brought their order to the table and laid out an elaborate spread of traditional Cuban dishes. Nancy smiled excitedly and took a large helping of one of the dishes. Harold laughed at her. Be careful. That dish has a lot of spices in it. She took a bite and smiled happily. It's delicious. You have to try it. Suddenly remembering something, she reached for her phone. She took a photo of their meal and sent it to Aster. Nancy quickly typed a message. Hi, friend. I'm enjoying the best Cuban dishes today. When are you coming over to join me? Esther quickly replied. That looks amazing. We're drowning in work. Xavier's been so busy that I've hardly seen him all week. Nancy grinned and typed a response. That's a pity. I'll have to get takeout and bring it back for you. She put her phone back in her purse and looked at Harold earnestly. Dad, do you often go out or have social gatherings? She had noticed that nobody seemed to recognize him. He was a Sloane, one of the most powerful families in Cuba. If she had been shopping with Gavin, everyone would have recognized him immediately, and the store assistant would have been more respectful and forthcoming. Harold smiled and wiped his mouth with a napkin. I prefer my own company. Afraid that she may misunderstand him, he quickly explained. Unless, of course, I can spend time with you. She blushed slightly, and she had a tiny sparkle in her eyes. It doesn't seem like you've been in many relationships before. I'm sure you must have been in love at some point. Won't you tell me about her? Nancy's question took Harold by surprise. He had never imagined having a daughter, let alone conversing with her about his love life. A little embarrassed, he shuffled in his chair and cleared his throat. It was a long time ago. I was still in university. He told her about how he met a young woman and that they had fallen in love. He had a distant look in his eyes as he recalled how heartbroken he had been when she had suddenly passed away. It had taken him years to recover from losing her, and all he had left of her were cherished memories of their time together. Nancy listened to him intently. You're such a romantic. Harold's ears went red, and he looked down. You're teasing me. She chuckled. I want to learn everything there is to know about you. She slid a dish across the table toward him. I don't like this one. You have it. Harold took a large bite and smiled happily. Nancy looked at him, and a memory from her childhood flashed through her mind. Although she had never been a picky eater, there were a few dishes that she didn't enjoy. Whenever she'd had to eat something she didn't like, she would pass the plate to Edward. She would smile sweetly at her father. You eat this. It will make you even more handsome. He wouldn't get cross at her and would obligingly eat whatever she had passed to him. She suddenly felt a wave of emotions wash over her, and warm tears welled in her eyes. She looked away and tried to force back the tears. She took a large mouthful of a spicy dish that burned her mouth. The tears streamed down her cheeks, and she quickly picked up her purse to find a tissue while fanning her mouth with her hands. Harold passed her a napkin and chuckled softly. "Didn't I warn you? That dish is particularly hot. It's best to eat it slowly." She took the napkin from Harold and wiped her tears away. Nancy forced a smile, but in her heart, she felt a deep sadness at losing her parents. She had lost everything, but had finally found a way to make up for it. She was still Nancy, but she was also Maria. Being Maria allowed her to save the life she had missed out on. Much to her disappointment, she couldn't try all the dishes Harold had ordered because she was full. She asked the waiter to pack a container of the leftovers. To help ease the feeling of a full stomach, she and Harold decided to walk instead of taking the car. They passed several quaint stores until they got to a jewelry store. Harold thought that the salesperson came across as aloof and ignored him. Instead, he turned to Nancy. "Maria, take your time and choose something that you like." She knew he wanted to spoil her, and the clothing store debacle had disappointed him. She carefully selected a few delicate pieces and showed them to Harold. He glanced over them before calling the salesperson. "This young lady will take this necklace, these earrings, and the matching bracelet." Nancy didn't know what to say. The gold and diamond pieces were exquisitely designed and very expensive. Once they had their purchase, they continued down the street, and Nancy browsed through many stores. The bodyguards followed her in, and then they came out carrying several shopping bags. It was almost evening by the time they returned to the car. Carter had called to say that he had arranged for his chef to prepare a special dinner and wanted them to join. They drove through the Sloan sprawling estate, and the driver stopped at the entrance to the main house. As they got out of the car, they bumped into Mackenzie. She had picked up an illness from Alexander and had been recovering for a few weeks. She looked weak and tired. Mackenzie stared at Nancy and Harold and looked at the car, expecting to see Jonathan. But when he didn't appear, she frowned and walked over to greet Harold. "Hello, Uncle Harold." She then turned to Nancy and gave her a cold look. "Hello, Maria. What a surprise to see you here." Nancy smiled politely. "Hello, Mackenzie. It was such a lovely day, so Harold took me shopping." A bodyguard walked up to Nancy with his arms full of shopping bags. "Shall I take these to your room?" Nancy nodded. "Yes, thank you." Mackenzie narrowed her eyes. She couldn't understand why Harold would spoil Nancy like that. She had a sudden thought, but shrugged it off as impossible. Jonathan was set to become head of the Davidson family, and Nancy wouldn't be so stupid as to have an affair with Harold. He didn't have much power in the Sloan family either. It made no sense. She was about to say something, but it was too late. Harold and Nancy had already begun to walk away. They laughed and chatted happily as they entered the large marble foyer. Mackenzie sighed angrily as she watched Harold and Maria walk away. She felt an overwhelming sense of jealousy and anger build up inside of her. She wondered what was going on with Harold. He had never had children and wasn't very affectionate to her and her brothers. But now that Nancy was there, he had the happiest smile on his face. She detested how Nancy made all the men around her swoon. She recalled the time when she had been interested in Jonathan. She had asked him what his hobbies were, and he had laughed and said his hobbies were to conquer the world and spoil his beautiful women with flowers. The more she thought about Nancy, the angrier she became. She rushed to her room and ran into Gavin in the hallway. She had known about Gavin's return, and although they had little chance of regaining power in the family, she still found comfort in seeing him. "What's Maria Davis doing at our house?" Gavin's eyes lit up. "She's back?" He then remembered that his face was still swollen, and he didn't want to be seen like that. Mackenzie looked at her brother's reaction in disgust. She scowled angrily. "Men, you're all the same." She turned around and left. Nancy and Jonathan stayed in one of the Sloanes' guest suites that night. The Sloanes' estate had been built on an estuary, and many bungalows stood on stilts above the waterline. A series of walkways connected the bungalows, and some of the bungalows were very far apart, so Mackenzie wouldn't have seen Jonathan return after working late that evening. He also left early the following morning to finish his work before the festivities began. Nancy had business matters to attend to and stayed behind to work on her laptop. She stopped working at mid-morning to stroll around the estate with Harold and have coffee with him. While they enjoyed a leisurely morning, the staff bustled and hurried around in preparation for the following day's event. Mackenzie had noticed that her grandfather seemed unusually happy, and she curiously wondered why. She sauntered over to him and began to massage his neck. "Grandpa, why are we hosting a party tomorrow? We haven't had a party here for ages." Carter smiled and nodded. "Yes, we are." He didn't elaborate, but turned his head to look at her. "By the way, I've invited your future husband to attend tomorrow." Mackenzie felt a cold shiver run down her spine and forced a smile. "Grandpa, don't be silly. I'm still young. I would much rather accompany you to the party." Carter shook his head. "My sweet granddaughter, you're almost 25. It's time you marry. Tim Healy is back from overseas, and tomorrow is the perfect opportunity for you to meet him." Mackenzie's heart sank when she heard the name Tim Healy. Everyone knew about him. He was young and reckless, and had a terrible reputation in Havana for being a ladies' man. She suspected that he also had several sexually transmitted diseases. Her life would be ruined if she had to marry him. She also knew that deep in her heart, she was already in love with someone else. Oliver had never married, and she desperately wanted to become Mrs. Williams. She had been reckless with Oliver and wouldn't make the same mistakes she had made in the past. She smiled sweetly at Carter. "Grandpa, let me first meet him. Our generation prefers to get to know one another first before making any major announcements." Carter sighed and patted her gently on the arm. "Okay, I'll give you some time." She breathed a sigh of relief. "Why are we having a party tomorrow? Are we celebrating good news?" "Yes, it's very good news." Again, he didn't say why they were having the party, and Mackenzie left feeling confused. That night, she had a vivid dream that Nancy and Jonathan had divorced, and that Nancy had married Harold. When she woke up the following day, she gazed over the lawns as the staff hung decorations and set up cocktail tables on the veranda. She remembered her dream and wondered if it had been a premonition. She sat at her dressing table and looked at herself in the mirror. She forced a smile and did her makeup and hair before putting on an expensive designer dress and shoes. The festivities were scheduled to begin just before noon. Nancy would first acknowledge to the whole Sloane family that she is one of them before being introduced to the guests. She woke early and took her time to get ready. She wore a vintage dress and the jewelry that Harold had bought for her. She waited for Jonathan to return from work, and they walked along the wooden bridges that connected the bungalows toward a small wooden structure decorated with ornate carvings. It was the Sloane family memorial building. The guests had slowly begun to arrive and had gathered on the lawn in front of the ornate wooden building. They didn't know the reason for the occasion and casually chatted to one another. At the appointed time, Carter arrived. He was wearing a smart suit and a tie decorated with the family crest. He also wore a heavy gold ring, as was customary for the head of a Cuban family to wear on special occasions. He walked up to the ornate wooden structure and lit a candle. He turned to address his family, who had all gathered there. "The Sloane family has lived in Cuba for over 24 generations. Today, I welcome home my long-lost granddaughter." The guests on the lawn struggled to hear what Carter had said. No one was sure what he was about to do until they saw Nancy approach alongside Harold. Mackenzie's heart began to race. She was sure her dream had been a premonition. She smirked when she realized that if her dream came true, it would mean that Jonathan was once again Cuba's most eligible bachelor. But she still had her doubts. Nancy wasn't wearing a wedding gown or a veil. She shrugged and eagerly watched the procession. Nancy walked up to the wooden structure and nodded at Carter. He handed her the candle, smiled at her, and led her to Harold, who had been waiting on the walkway. She hooked her arm in Harold's, and they followed Carter as he walked toward the guests waiting on the lawn. Carter smiled widely. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me and my family on this auspicious occasion. Today, we welcome my granddaughter, Maria, who has finally returned to the Sloan family. Please make your way to the hall so I may introduce her to everyone. And I hope you enjoy the feast we have prepared in her honor." The guests were stunned. Everyone began to chatter with one another excitedly. The words granddaughter and return to the Sloan family buzzed on everyone's lips. Mackenzie didn't move. She stared at Nancy with astonishment. Gavin, who had been standing close by in the shadows, looked at his grandfather and blinked as if he couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The hall on the Sloan estate had been festively decorated with flowers and candles. Carter went to the front of the stage and spoke with confidence and pride. "Welcome, everyone. I know many of you heard my announcement outside already, but I'd like to officially introduce you all again to a very special member of my family." He signaled to Nancy to step forward. "My granddaughter, Maria." Nancy smiled and joined Carter on the stage. A murmur rippled among the guests, and Nancy saw the looks of confusion on their faces. "Maria is the biological daughter of my third son, Harold," Carter explained. Gavin took a step forward and gave his grandfather a puzzled look. The wound on his face had not yet healed, and it was obvious that he had tried to cover it up with makeup. "Grandfather, that's impossible," he said incredulously. "How could this woman be my cousin?" Carter waved a dismissive hand at him, and then he took a piece of paper out of his inner jacket pocket. He waved it in the air. "This is the result of a DNA test that both Harold and Maria took 2 days ago. It proves without a shadow of a doubt that Maria is indeed Harold's biological daughter." Gavin couldn't believe what he was hearing. He snatched the DNA report out of Carter's hand and looked blankly at the words on the paper. His head was a confused mix of emotions that he couldn't identify. After so many years of playing the field, he had finally fallen in love with a girl who had somehow turned out to be his cousin. It was enough to make him feel nauseous, and his head began to spin. Some time ago, because of Oliver, a rumor had spread that there was a relationship between Mackenzie and Gavin. The very thought of it had sickened him because they were related. If Nancy was really his cousin, he felt relieved that he had never touched her. But in his heart, he still loved her, and he had fantasized about her on many occasions. Gavin felt his stomach churn, and he thought he might throw up there in front of everyone. He looked at Nancy again and saw her in a different light. She was still the beautiful woman he was in love with, but he thought he could detect a bit of likeness to Harold in her face, and he shuddered. "She's my cousin," he thought in despair. Then, he turned and strode out of the hall, unable to accept his grandfather's declaration. He knew everyone was watching him, but at that moment, he didn't care about his reputation. Gavin stormed through the waterside pavilion and went out into the garden. He formed a fist and punched the first tree he came to. Its rough bark cut through his skin, but he didn't notice the pain. And he punched the tree trunk again and again, until the skin on his hand came off in strips, and the tree was smeared with his blood. Then, as if he had lost all his strength, he fell to the ground in a dejected heap. "Why is this happening to me?" he thought, gazing up at the sky. "What have I done to deserve this?" Back inside the hall, Harold joined his father on the stage and addressed the guests. "Maria is my daughter, and from now on, I promise I will do my best to take care of her, love her, and make up for the more than 2 decades of her life that I've missed." He turned to Nancy and took her hands in his. Everyone looked at her and waited for her response. "Thank you, Dad," she said. "I'll do my best to be a good daughter." Father and daughter hugged each other in a display of familial love and acceptance. Somewhere in the crowd, Mackenzie watched the scene unfold on the stage and tried her best to suppress her emotions. Like her brother, she couldn't believe what she had just heard. But she had a very different reason for the anger that was building up inside her. As the only girl in the Sloan family, she had always been known as the princess, and everyone had recognized her as a worthy occupant of that role. But in front of everyone, her grandfather had just taken that title away from her and given it to a woman who had never had anything to do with the family before. But Nancy's newly announced relationship with Harold certainly explained the early intimacy Mackenzie had witnessed between them. She had assumed that they were in some kind of romantic relationship, but father and daughter made much more sense. She considered what she knew about her cousin. Maria had come from an ordinary, run-of-the-mill American family. Her adopted father was in jail, and her stepmother had run off with another man. And now, just like that, she's a direct descendant of the Sloan family, Mackenzie thought with disgust. And not only that, her husband's probably going to inherit the entire Davidson family's fortune in a few years' time. Mackenzie was furious. With her position within the Sloan family relegated, she would never be able to snare Oliver. She sunk her long fingernails into the flesh of her palms and fixed her steely eyes on the people on the stage. Carter, oblivious to the disgust of his other grandchildren, continued proudly. "My granddaughter is not only a beautiful woman, but she's also very intelligent. Recently, she floated her very own company, Brightstar, on the stock market, making her the youngest female tycoon in the USA. As her grandfather, I couldn't be more proud." The guests cheered and clapped, and some called out to those on the stage. "Congratulations to Carter for finding his long-lost granddaughter. Hip hip." "Hooray! She's a true asset to the family." "Well done, Harold, for finding your daughter after all these years." "Maria, you'll be the perfect role model for Cuban girls. They need smart women like you to look up to." "Hey, Harold, why didn't you find her earlier? She'll be the top socialite in Havana." The crowd laughed, and everyone continued to applaud and praise the Sloans. Carter reveled in the attention, and his face lit up like a light bulb. He had never looked so radiant and happy. Thank you," he said to his audience. "But I hope none of you young men are thinking about asking Maria out on a date, because, if you are, I have some bad news for you. She's already married to the heir of the Davidson family." He chuckled, and some of the young men booed playfully. Carter turned to Jonathan. "I'm more than happy to leave my granddaughter in your capable hands, Jonathan. Come and join us on stage." Jonathan left his place in the crowd and climbed the steps to the stage. He walked to Nancy's side and held her hand tightly. She looked up at him, and her eyes were filled with love. Speaking loudly for everyone to hear, Jonathan said, "Mr. Sloan, you can rest assured that I'll continue to take excellent care of my wife." "Wonderful!" Carter cried with delight. "I think our successful young couple should start the evening festivities and perform the first dance." The lights dimmed, and the band struck up a tune. Laughing, Jonathan led Nancy onto the dance floor, and they broke into a traditional waltz. Everyone watched with appreciation as the young couple twirled around the dance floor. Mackenzie was the only one who glared with disdain. She looked around and saw the happy faces of the other guests and imagined that they were all ridiculing her. On the dance floor, Nancy and Jonathan were the image of a perfect couple. The tune came to an end, and everyone clapped and cheered as Jonathan and Nancy stopped dancing and bowed dramatically. The band struck up another tune, and more people made their way to the dance floor. Those who remained in their seats chatted about the evening's events. The Sloan family has really come up in the world. They'll be marrying into the Williams family. And now they're nicely connected to the future head of the Davidson family, too. And that's not all. Just imagine what this is going to do for the economy of Havana. I've always thought that Mackenzie's a good-looking girl, but do you guys agree that Maria's even hotter? Absolutely, dude. I wonder if Mackenzie knows it. They're worlds apart. Maria is going to be the new face of Havana, and no one else will come close, in my opinion. Least of all Mackenzie. But it's not just about looks, one of the guests said to his friends as they discussed the differences between Maria and Mackenzie. Maria's really smart, too. You're talking about Brightstar, right? His friend asked. But wasn't that company a betrothal gift that Jonathan gave to her? That doesn't prove how smart she is. Sure it does. Didn't you see the press conferences on Brightstar? They had a few problems, but Maria remained calm and fixed them herself. She hit the nail on the head. At that time, Jonathan was overseas, and no one else helped her save the situation. Yeah, that's true. And I heard that Brightstar's research and development team was hired by her. She's really good at discovering talent, and she's a great employer. So people fall over each other to get a job working for her. I don't know any high society girl who has achieved anything like that. And she's still only in her 20s. She's been studying since she was young, and she didn't rely on any connections to get her into the top school in the USA. I heard that she joined a fantastic research and development team even before she graduated. How do you know all of this? Oh, I read an in-depth article about her once. She's one of those amazing women who have both looks and brains. So what you're saying is that Mackenzie, by comparison, is just an empty vessel? She's not even that. Look at her now. She's a plain Jane next to her new cousin. Just then, one of the men sensed someone standing behind him, and when he looked around, he was shocked to find Mackenzie glaring at him. He nudged his friends, and they all turned and looked into Mackenzie's face. Oh, hi, Mackenzie, the man said sheepishly. How long have you been standing there? If you're wondering how much of your trashy conversation I heard it all. Mackenzie's voice was as cold as ice, but her eyes burned ferociously as she wanted to turn them all into ashes. Since you seem to have so much time to gossip here, why don't you take a closer look at your own situation? Just how many illegitimate children do you think we've got running around, huh? We all know what kind of guy you are. The man stared at her with venom in his eyes. He had never heard Mackenzie speak in such a way before, and her words stung. You. He had been about to say something offensive, but he stopped himself just in time. He knew it didn't pay to offend anyone from the Sloan family, so instead, he turned around and walked away. His friends looked sheepishly at each other, and then they did the same. Mackenzie was disgusted to see that some of the group had once been among those who had often flattered her in the past. She followed them with her eyes and saw the first man approaching Nancy. Her heart filled with hatred, and again, she imagined that everyone around her was laughing at her. She had felt like that before, when Oliver had been unkind to her, and she didn't like the feeling one bit. She was the eldest daughter of the Sloan family, and until that day, she had been the only one. She couldn't bear the thought of giving up her esteemed position to another woman. Her eyes locked on Nancy, who was surrounded by people trying to curry favor with her. Mackenzie wanted to scream, but she took several deep breaths to calm herself instead. Just then, she heard a male voice over her shoulder. Hey, if it isn't the eldest Miss Sloan. Mackenzie heard the irony in the man's voice, and she spun on her heels to face him. The man before her detected a trace of bitterness in her eyes. She looked him up and down. He was young, in his 20s, and he wore a casual suit and a pair of gold-rimmed glasses. He looked cultured. Mackenzie had never met him before. Oh, I'm sorry, he said, slightly flustered. I haven't introduced myself. My name is Tim Healy. He bowed pompously. In an instant, She knew that the young man was the person Carter wanted to set her up with. She felt a wave of disgust at the thought of dating the repulsive man, and without another thought, she said, "I don't think you and I are all that suited, Mr. Healy." Then, she turned her back to him. "Oh, really?" Tim laughed, unperturbed. "Are you questioning my size, Miss Sloane?" Mackenzie gave him a disdainful look. She had never met such an objectionable man. Then, she turned away again. "I'm just joking," Tim said. "We're both adults." Then, he leaned in closer and whispered in her ear. "I've seen your sex tape, you know. Alexander showed it to me." Mackenzie gasped and took an involuntary step back. Her face turned red, with a mix of anger and embarrassment. "What do you mean?" "Oh, didn't you know? Alexander likes to share his conquests with his friends. It just so happens that I had just returned to the country at the time, and everyone had organized a welcome home party for me. Alexander came, and then we all admired the way the two of you came together, so to speak." Mackenzie grabbed Tim's collar and shook him. "I dare you to say that again." Her voice was shrill, and she seemed to have lost all composure. "My dad wants to set me up with you," Tim said casually. "He wants us to get married. And even if you don't want to, I think you might have to. My family's lacking a certain kind of young lady to oversee it right now." He emphasized the words, young lady. He raised his hand and calmly removed Mackenzie's hand from his collar, but he didn't let go of it. He squeezed it tightly. "I don't dislike your loudliness, but where did you get the confidence to turn me down? Would you prefer if I took a copy of Alexander's video and posted it online?" Mackenzie felt bile rise into her throat, and she thought she was going to vomit all over the despicable man. Her whole body felt cold, and she shivered, frozen to the spot. But Tim kept on. "Run along and tell your grandfather that you've agreed to marry me after all." Mackenzie was surrounded by people and the sounds of laughter, but she saw and heard none of it. She felt as if she was sinking into a dark, icy river, as she imagined the pain and misery that would be the rest of her life. The party was a huge success, and most of the guests had enjoyed the joyous occasion. When it was all over, Nancy slumped on the edge of the bed in her and Jonathan's room. The whole experience had been more tiring than working overtime, and she felt utterly exhausted. She drank a large glass of cold water to moisten her dry throat. "My feet hurt," she complained to her husband. "Look at them. They're all swollen." Jonathan sat down on the floor beside her and gently removed her high-heel shoes. He massaged her feet. "I wouldn't wear high heels next time if I were you." "But they're the only shoes I can wear with this kind of dress." "Then wear a different kind of dress. Something that goes with flat shoes. Anyway, you look great and everything." She smiled affectionately at him. "You sure know how to say the right things. I think you deserve a kiss for that." Jonathan moved closer, and she wrapped her arms around his neck. She placed her lips on his, and they kissed passionately. Instantly, the room felt warm, and Nancy's heart beat wildly. She leaned back on the bed, and Jonathan lay on top of her. But just as things were heating up, her stomach grumbled, and the moment was lost. "Are you hungry again?" Jonathan asked Nancy. He felt a little disappointed that their passionate kiss had fizzled out when her stomach had growled. He kissed her on the cheek and rolled over onto his back. "Didn't you eat at the party?" Nancy shook her head. "I think I forgot to eat. There were so many people who wanted to talk to me. I had a few drinks and lots of water, so I guess I didn't feel hungry before. But now, I'm ravenous." "I'll go get the kitchen to fix you something." Jonathan rolled off the bed, straightened his clothes, and left the room. Nancy lay on her back on the bed for a while, and then she got up and put on a pair of slippers. She walked out into the corridor and fed the koi fish in the ornamental fish pond. She heard footsteps approaching, and she assumed Jonathan was already back. But when she looked up to greet him, she saw it was Gavin. She didn't really want to speak to him, but she thought it would be rude to ignore him. "Hello, cousin." She watched his swollen face grow redder at the name. He walked right up to her, and then he paused for a few seconds, as if he were trying to find the right words. "Was that DNA report a fake?" he asked eventually. Nancy shook her head. "Of course not. Carter was with Dad and me when we had the blood tests. I'm no fake. Besides, Harold was in the U.S. around the time I was conceived, and he did know my mother intimately." Gavin's heart sank. The last thread of hope had been cut, and he knew there was nothing he could do about it. He turned around and walked away. Nancy recalled the day she had been abducted and held captive by Alexander. After Gavin had saved her, and he had said that he was interested in her, and judging by the look on his face a moment earlier, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed that both she and Jonathan were magnets for people who ended up being blood relatives. She had heard some bad news about Gavin, and she knew he was someone who only valued things that benefited him. So, she assumed that when he claimed that he was attracted to her, his feelings probably didn't run very deep. It was hard to imagine even having a normal cousinly relationship with Gavin, let alone anything more than that, and she shuddered at the thought. She couldn't be bothered to make any kind of effort with him, but she knew he probably wouldn't disappear either, so she would have to be wary of him. Harold and Xavier were the only family members of her new family that she felt she could trust, so it was best for her to keep a distance from the others. She went back to her room, and shortly afterward, Jonathan returned. He took her hand and led her to the kitchen. "Your dad's arranged some food for you," he said. "How did he know I haven't eaten?" Harold greeted her in the kitchen and pulled out a chair for her at the dining table. "I had the chef make you some of those snacks you said you like, Maria." Nancy gave him a look of gratitude, and an overwhelming feeling of happiness washed over her. "Thank you. I'm going to eat them all." She sat down and began to dig into the food. Jonathan watched her cram spoonful after spoonful into her mouth, and he looked at her anxiously. "Hey, go easy there, honey. You don't want to overeat. Save some for later." "I don't know why, but I just feel so hungry all the time these days." She signaled to him to sit down and have something to eat. He pulled out a chair and took one of the delicacies, and Harold did the same. The three of them sat together and ate contentedly. Eventually, Nancy declared that she was full and could eat no more. She rubbed her flat belly and frowned. "I don't know what's wrong with me these past couple of weeks. It's like there's something inside my stomach that's eating everything I eat. Maybe I have worms." Jonathan dropped his cutlery. "Something inside her stomach," he thought with a little trepidation. "A baby, perhaps." He wanted to say something, but the serving staff were milling about, and he didn't want to mention it in front of them. "Hey, babe, why don't we drive out to the city for a stroll?" he asked instead. It was a pleasant day, and Nancy liked the idea of that. "Sure, let's go." Then, turning to Harold, she added, "Do you want to come too, Dad?" Harold hadn't wanted to be a third wheel, but his daughter was in town for only a few days, and he wanted to spend as much time with her as he possibly could. He didn't know when he might see her again, so he accepted the invitation wholeheartedly. The three of them left the waterside pavilion and made their way to Jonathan's car. He asked one of the trusted bodyguards to drive, and they headed off toward the city. They had barely left the property when Jonathan said what was on his mind. "Maria, I was wondering if you might be pregnant." Nancy's face froze. The idea that she might be pregnant hadn't occurred to her, but it made sense. She racked her brain and realized that her period was a couple of days late. She had a feeling of falling through the air, and her stomach turned over. "I have been really hungry recently," she mused. as if I'm eating for two, and I've been sleeping a lot. She hadn't experienced any morning sickness, but she knew that not all women felt nauseous or vomited when they were pregnant. She had read somewhere, though, that most women feel constantly tired throughout the first trimester. She gripped Jonathan's arm tightly. What should we do? He wrapped a reassuring arm around her. That's why I wanted you to come out with me. Let's go to the hospital and get you examined. A friend of mine has a clinic near here, Harold said. He had been listening from the front passenger seat. It's very private. Let's go there. He took out his phone and called his friend to make the necessary arrangements. Then, he gave the driver the address, and they headed toward the clinic. When they arrived, a nurse was waiting for them, and she led them to a private room, where she took a sample of Nancy's blood. Then, Nancy and the two men waited nervously in the waiting room for the results to come back. She gripped Jonathan's hand, and they all sat in silence for several minutes. What are we going to do if I'm not pregnant? She asked her husband, breaking the silence. It won't matter. We're still young, so we have plenty of time. Don't worry. What if I am pregnant and the baby's not healthy? Nancy's thoughts were whirling in her head, and she couldn't help but think of the worst-case scenarios. What if I have an ectopic pregnancy like Ashley? Jonathan tried to settle her nerves. Babe, that's unlikely. They're really rare. You're going to be fine, and so is the baby. Harold placed a comforting hand on his daughter's shoulder. Try not to worry, Maria. Jonathan and I will take care of you. She nodded and melted into her thoughts again. After a few more minutes of silence, she asked, Aren't you nervous? If we are going to have a baby, I wonder what gender it'll be. Jonathan looked at his wife, who was normally so calm and collected, and he chuckled. He had never seen her so vulnerable before, and it warmed his heart. I am nervous, honey, but I believe it'll all be fine. If you like, we can find out the baby's gender in about 4 months' time. But I really don't care whether it's a boy or a girl. I'll be happy with either. Nancy thought of the help that Helga had given her, and it made her feel even more anxious. What if it's twins? She thought. Or even triplets. Then, she thought about what Jonathan had said. How do you know how long it takes before you can find out a baby's sex? She asked. Men didn't usually know such details. Oh, I read it somewhere, he replied casually, and he gave her a kiss on the cheek. Nancy's thoughts continued to swim in her mind. Jonathan's just as excited about this baby as I am. Is that why he's been working so hard lately? Not because he wants to be busy, but so that he can be ready to take some time off when the time comes? They didn't have to wait long for the test results. In less than a half hour, a doctor appeared in the hallway with a report in her hand. Nancy had never felt so nervous in her life, not even when she had been waiting for the results of her college entrance exam. Her nerves got the better of her, and she told Jonathan to speak to the doctor for her. Sure, honey, he agreed. You sit there and rest. I'll be right back. Jonathan stood up and intercepted the doctor. My wife's really nervous, Doc, he said calmly, even though his heart was beating wildly. You can tell me the results. The doctor smiled and handed him the report. I'm pleased to tell you that your wife is pregnant. Everything seems to be normal, so at this stage, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. But it's important that your wife rests well, particularly over the next 3 months. That's the most critical time. It occurred to Jonathan that Nancy had been very active recently. They had just had her welcome to the family ceremony, and she had been on her feet the whole time. They had even danced. We obviously didn't know until now that she was pregnant, he said to the doctor. What if she's done some damage that we don't know about? Everything's fine. She's in the very early stages of pregnancy, and most people don't know they're pregnant for the first few weeks. Jonathan nodded vigorously. So what do we need to do next, Doc? You don't need to do anything other than make sure she gets plenty of rest. You should probably make an appointment for her to have a routine checkup in a few weeks' time. Okay, great. Thank you, doctor. She nodded, and then she left to speak to her next patient. Clutching the report, Jonathan returned to Nancy in the waiting room. She was so nervous that she had turned pale. She looked at him anxiously as he entered the room, but she couldn't bring herself to speak. He sat down in the chair beside her and gently patted her belly. We're going to have a baby. He beamed at her, and her eyes twinkled, and his eyes twinkled like she had never seen them twinkle before. Nancy stared at him in disbelief for several seconds. Then, her eyes widened, and her face broke into a smile. Are you serious? She asked, taking the report from him. Yes, babe, I'm serious. He laughed at her reaction. We're having a baby. Nancy rarely saw such a look of excitement on her husband's face. Even when he had pulled the Davis Group out of a quagmire and he had bounced around with enthusiasm for days afterward, it had been nothing like the look of utter contentment and excited anticipation that she saw at that moment. She began to laugh, and he laughed too, and then they hugged each other with joy. We're having a baby, she whispered after they had calmed down a little. She touched her belly and looked down at it. It was still completely flat, but she knew that a miracle was forming inside. Harold had watched the interaction between his daughter and son-in-law from nearby, not wanting to interfere or intrude on their immediate joy. When he felt the time was right, he stood up and patted them both on the back. So I'm going to be a grandfather. His eyes glistened with joy. I've only just found my daughter, and already she's going to give me a grandchild. Maria, you've made me a very happy man. He gave her a hug. I'm going to be a grandfather. Nancy laughed. You can help me take care of your grandchild one day, Dad. There was nothing more they needed to do at the clinic, so they made their way back out to the car that was waiting for them in the parking lot. Their good news made Jonathan see Nancy in a new light, and he began treating her as if she was no longer the strong woman he had married, but a delicate little creature that might break at the slightest touch. As soon as she stood up, he wrapped his arms around her to help her along. She looked at him incredulously. There's really no need for that, honey. I might be pregnant, but I'm still perfectly capable of walking on my own. Sorry. Jonathan still looked worried. But I thought you said you were tired, and the doctor said you have to take it easy from now on. I am tired, but I can still do stuff for myself. She rolled her eyes at him playfully. Besides, I read that at this stage, the baby's not even the size of a sesame seed, so it's not exactly dragging me down with its weight just yet. Jonathan felt a little better, and he held her hand instead. But Nancy noticed that his pace had slowed down considerably. They got into the car, and the driver drove them back to the house. On the way, Jonathan chatted with Harold. Maria and I are planning to go back to New York tomorrow. Harold looked surprised. Aren't you going to stay for a little longer? I think it's best we go back while Maria's still in the early stages. I hate to say it, but this place isn't at all that safe for us. Harold understood what he meant, and he nodded sadly. There were people in both the Davidson and Sloan families who weren't afraid to go out of their way to make things difficult for Nancy and Jonathan. It would be better for them to return home rather than be on guard every day. That way, they could enjoy the pregnancy without feeling threatened. Why don't you come with us? Jonathan suggested. I'd like that, Harold said. But now isn't the right time. I have a few matters to attend to first, but when they're done, I'll come over and see you and Maria. Sure, sounds good. That evening, Jonathan and Nancy returned to the Davidson family home. Nancy was tired, so she had an early night. After she had gone to bed, Jonathan went to see Matthew in his study to tell them that he would be leaving the following day. Matthew nodded indifferently. After all, he knew that Jonathan had only gone to Cuba for Nancy, to be officially welcomed into the Sloan family, so he hadn't expected him to stay long. He had been to the lunch, and had seen how everyone had fawned over the Sloanes. But it didn't bother him, because Nancy was part of his family too, and he now had an alliance with the Sloanes. Overall, he was more than satisfied with the situation. As Jonathan was about to leave Matthew's study, he took a deep breath. "Oh, and about Latham, please keep what we discussed to yourself. I'll be back on the 10th of next month to take him back to New York. You've held him captive long enough." Matthew looked intently at him, understanding his hidden meaning. Then, he let out a long sigh. "We never decided that I would release him. You're forcing me into this, Jonathan." "No, I'm not forcing you. I'm just informing you." Matthew didn't say anything else, but Jonathan knew that his uncle felt compromised. The next day, Harold saw Nancy and Jonathan off at the airport. Nancy's bodyguard carried the gifts that Harold had bought for her, and she checked it into the hold. She was wearing the pants and the yellow coat that she had gotten from the boutique when they had gone shopping together. She waved to Harold as they were about to go through the security check. "We'll see you in New York soon." Harold waved back. "Sure." He was reluctant to let her go, and he knew he would count down the days until he saw her again. He watched sadly as she and Jonathan walked into the security checkpoint. And then he turned and left. In the departure lounge, Nancy found a seat and sat down to wait for their flight to be called. She put her hand on her belly and took a selfie. Then, she sent the photo to Esther, but she put no words with it. A moment later, her phone buzzed. It was Esther's reply, which she read immediately. "Nice pic. You're looking radiant, babe." Then, over the next minute or so, Nancy received a string of messages from Esther. "Wait, are you pregnant? Why did you send me a selfie with your hand on your belly? You're pregnant, aren't you? Tell me, are you pregnant?" Nancy could almost hear Esther's voice as she read the messages, one after another. She smiled to herself as she imagined her friend becoming more excited with each message and her voice rising in pitch with each one. Jonathan stuck his head over Nancy's shoulder and read the string of texts. He chuckled and rolled his eyes. He appreciated the close friendship that his wife had with her old friend. Nancy waited for a break in the flow of text messages before she replied. "Yep, I am. And you're going to be the godmother." Almost as soon as Nancy pressed send, her phone rang. It was Esther. "Oh!" Her friend squealed down the phone. "I couldn't send any more texts after I read your last one. I had to call you. Oh my goodness, girl. Are you really having a baby?" Esther was so excited that she barely gave Nancy a chance to get a word in edgewise. "I can't believe it. You only just started trying. Trust you to be super efficient and fall pregnant instantly. That husband of yours obviously has some pretty fast swimmers." Nancy was eventually able to get a word in. "I know, right? We obviously work well together. So, how far along are you? It can only be a couple of weeks, right? 3 at most." She didn't give Nancy a chance to reply before she added, "But wait, if I'm going to be the baby's godmother, I'm also going to be an aunt, since I'm going to be married to your newly discovered cousin. I'm going to be an auntie." Esther squealed with excitement again. Nancy laughed at her friend's amusing reaction to her news. "Well, you would have to be my sister to be its aunt, but let's not complicate things. I can hardly believe it myself. I only found out yesterday. We went to the clinic for a blood test, and it came back positive." She paused and turned to Jonathan. "You know, Jonathan's right here beside me, listening in. He heard everything, and he's grinning like a Chester cat because you said he has fast swimmers." She giggled at the visual. "If you keep praising him like that, he's bound to go showing off to Xavier, and then Xavier will want to prove that he's just as virile. So you better watch out, girl." Esther considered that prospect for a moment. "I think he'll be able to compete pretty well. And I know this land of mine is fertile, so we shouldn't have any problems in that department." She gasped as an idea came to her. "I'm going to have to tell him to get a move on so that we can have our children at almost the same time. Then they can play together and be best friends, and it'll be a good excuse for us to catch up too. Esther could hardly contain her excitement and enthusiasm. That would be cool, Nancy said. But for now, you can concentrate on being my baby's godmother. If I don't get pregnant soon, I hope you'll still have time for me, Esther said. Of course, Nancy chuckled. But if you're afraid about it, then you should hurry up and start a family of your own. And the sooner, the better, so our kids can play together. Are you nervous about it? Esther asked, turning serious. Yeah, I guess. It was pretty nerve-wracking waiting for the results yesterday. But now I feel fine. And you will too, when the time comes. Yes, if I start now, hopefully it'll happen within 3 months. So there won't be much of an age difference between our kids. They might even be able to go to kindergarten together. Imagine that! Esther's excitement continued to build. Are you sure Xavier's machinery is all working? Oh, I'm pretty sure about that. Esther was confident she would have no trouble falling pregnant. Anyway, they're calling my flight, so I have to go now. Nancy ended the call, and she and Jonathan boarded the airplane. As they took their seats, Jonathan confiscated Nancy's phone. Now that you're pregnant, you're going to have to monitor how much time you spend on your phone each day. These things are full of radiation, you know. Nancy stared at him, her mouth agog. Why do I feel like he's trying to control me now? She thought, feeling a little concerned. And just now, while you were talking, I read on the internet that pregnant women have to eat regularly. But it all has to be nutritious food. Otherwise, you might become obese. Still, Nancy stared at him in disbelief, and she looked as if she might cry. Are you saying that you won't like me anymore if I get fat? Jonathan panicked. He hadn't expected her to take his concern so much to heart. He took her head in his hands and kissed her on the forehead. I'd love you no matter how you looked. I just want you to be as fit as possible for the birth. Seeing that she still didn't look convinced, he took her into his arms and tried again to ease her worries. I read how important it is to eat well, so I thought that when we get home, I'll find a good nutritionist in our area who can give us a food plan that we can both follow. He paused and gazed into her eyes. Because we're in this together. Nancy felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, and she wondered why she felt so emotional. So if I get fat, you'll still love me? If you get fat, I'll get fat with you. He grinned playfully. But if that happens, how do I know you'll still love me? I won't, she said decisively. I like you the way you are. I don't want you to get fat. Jonathan shook his head in mock despair. In that case, I better maintain my perfect figure. Then, he leaned in closer and whispered in her ear. You know, the doctor said it's okay to continue our nightly activities. You're not going to turn me away, are you? Nancy pulled away from him, her face red with annoyance. You've got to be kidding me. You're not coming anywhere near me for months. I'm going to be way too tired for that. Jonathan pretended to burst into tears. He felt confident she would change her mind at some point. He just hoped it would be sooner rather than later. They settled into the flight, and a few hours later, they arrived back in New York. As soon as they got home, Jonathan told Jacob about Nancy's pregnancy. Jacob's eyes lit up, and he looked at his sister. That's fantastic, sis. I'm going to be an uncle. Yep, pretty cool, huh? Nancy said with a smile. You can help to look after it if you like. Sure, I'd love to. He gave his sister a warm hug. What a wonderful grown-up brother you've become, she thought happily. It was the middle of the day, and Jonathan had work to do at the office. He gathered his things. I'll see you guys later. I've got lots to catch up on at work. There was a pile of papers on his desk that needed his signature, so he went straight there to get that done. After they were all signed, he gave Ashley a call. She was working a few floors down in the marketing department, and she had been particularly busy recently. Hey, I have a document here that needs to go up to your office, she told him. I'll bring it up now, so I'll be there in a couple of minutes, and we can catch up. She took the elevator up to the top floor and handed the document to Jack. Then she went to Jonathan's office. Hey, Ashley, Jonathan said as she sat down on the spare chair in his office. Wait for me after work, will you? I'll take you to see Dr. Chang. It was already 6:30 when Ashley and Jonathan left the office and drove to the clinic, where Dr. Chang quickly examined Ashley. After confirming that everything was okay, he took out a syringe and a bottle. I'm going to give you an injection of the medicine for 3 consecutive days, he told her. I've done several experiments, and after 3 doses, your blood should be back to normal. She nodded. Should I come back tomorrow and the day after then? Yes, you could come after work. I'll ask Jack to speak to your supervisor about letting you leave work early, Jonathan offered. Okay, thanks. She held out her arm and closed her eyes. Jonathan patted her back to reassure her. Don't worry. Dr. Chang is very skilled. You won't feel a thing. She smiled. I'll be fine. I'm not afraid of injections. It was over in a few seconds, and she felt only a slight pain in her arm afterward. They thanked the doctor and left the clinic. Do you remember the blind date I told you about? She asked Jonathan when they were outside. How could I forget? Do you want me to go with you? She laughed. That would be quite awkward. I think I can manage on my own, but it wouldn't hurt to have a bodyguard nearby. Okay, I'll get someone to follow you. When is it? 3 days from now, on Saturday. Ashley returned to the clinic on Thursday and Friday, and after giving her the 3rd injection, Dr. Chang told her to go back in a month for a checkup. On Saturday, she washed her hair, put on a nice dress and some makeup, and took a cab to the restaurant to meet her blind date. Louis had booked a table at a high-end restaurant in Soho. She could hear the sound of live piano music playing in the background as the waiter led her to a table next to a window at the far end of the restaurant. Her date had already arrived and had his back to her. She noticed he was wearing a casual jacket and had a stylish haircut. Not bad, she thought. He looks oddly familiar, though. She had never been on a blind date before and suddenly felt nervous. She took a deep breath, straightened herself, and approached the young man. Just then, he turned around, and Ashley's jaw dropped when she saw who it was. Peter? I can't believe this. You're my blind date? He smiled and didn't seem at all surprised. Hey, Ashley, what a coincidence. He pulled out a chair for her, and she sat down. I didn't know you were from Houston, she said. I was born and raised in Texas. My parents still live there, and my father's company is there. Is this crazy? I never thought my blind date would be with you, and it never occurred to me to ask my dad for your number. She nodded, feeling awkward. I know. This is so weird. It's not that weird when you think about it. We're both single and about the same age. It's not that. I'm just embarrassed to be on a date with someone I already know. He handed her the menu. Are you hungry? You can have anything you like. It's my treat. And don't look at the prices. I should be treating you. You're the one who got me several levels up in the game. He shook his head. Absolutely not. I won't hear of it. Our latest video game is a huge hit, so I just got a big bonus from Brightstar. I also have shares in the company now that it's gone public. Let me buy you dinner. In that case, I'll order the most expensive champagne and some caviar, she joked. How about you? He asked. I heard you were working in the marketing department at the Davis Group. That's right. I'm working for Jonathan. She looked at the menu, pleased that Peter insisted on treating her. She had grown up surrounded by luxury and enjoyed being spoiled. After they ordered their drinks and main dishes, they sat in awkward silence for a while. Peter finally said, I never pictured you as the type of girl who would need to go on a blind date to meet someone. I bet you have plenty of men fawning over you. Tell that to my father. He's convinced I'll never get married. He thought the same thing about my brother. To tell you the truth, it's hard to meet people in New York. I have a few close friends, but my social life is practically non-existent." He nodded. "I know what you mean. I've been working crazy hours ever since I joined Brightstar's technical and development team, and most of my colleagues are men. I don't know where I'm supposed to meet someone." Ashley laughed. "Maybe that's where I should be working then." Peter made a face. "I wish I worked with more women, but I can't complain. I like my team. I can introduce you to some of my colleagues if you're interested." She sat back in her chair and smiled. His easygoing and relaxed attitude made her feel more comfortable. "Have you played Creation yet?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I've been so busy with work. Sometimes I even take it home." "That explains it." "Explains what?" "Nothing," he replied, waving his hands to dismiss the topic. He didn't want to tell her that he had noticed that she hadn't logged onto the game for a while. She still didn't know that he was Galaxy.